It's time for FLA Law, brought to you by the personal injury attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. This hour will be informative, along with taking your questions and comments. Now, here are your hosts for today's show.
That's right. We are live in the WTN studios with FLA Law live on the radio. Thank you all for joining us every Tuesday at 5 o'clock. Hopefully by now you've been a faithful listener and you know that this is your live legal call-in talk show that we do every Tuesday at 5 o'clock, giving you an opportunity to learn various legal topics, mostly personal injury, but every now and then we have special guests that come in and discuss various other areas of the law or legal related topics. And you also have an opportunity to call in, get your questions answered live on the air, or of course, just comment on the discussion for the night and the different things that we talk about on the show. We try to keep it interesting for you. And I think tonight will be another interesting show for you. We do have a repeat guest who'll be joining us here shortly to discuss some criminal defense and high-profile cases that are in the news right now. And he and I will be going over a few of those cases that I think are on the forefront of people's minds if you've been keeping up in the media as far as some of these cases that have been on the news and that are set for trial this year, then this should be an interesting show for you. So if you are interested in criminal cases and high profile trials, and this is something that intrigues you, tune in because it'll be a great show tonight with our special guest, attorney Cornelius Demps. He'll be joining us in about 10, 15 minutes or so on the show live. And you can call in with your questions or just comment your thoughts if you have any particular feelings about the trials that we're going to be talking about or about the defendants that are going to be tried. We are certainly happy to hear from you and have you join in on the conversation tonight when that gets started up. But of course, let me give you all the details on how you can continue to watch for the full hour because we are here until 6. We'll be having this conversation and we want you to be able to continue to listen to us on the radio or live on our streaming platforms or later on our podcast when those are put up. So first and foremost, we are, of course, live in the radio right now. So if you want to call in and have a question asked throughout the show tonight, the best number to call is going to be 727-441-3000. That is the call-in number tonight for our legal live call-in show. And of course, we are also streaming on some platforms tonight. We have our Facebook live stream that is up right now. You see myself, and soon you'll see my guest, Cornelius Demps, with me as well. So if you're streaming on Facebook or if you have a Facebook account, just type in Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers. You should see the red circle showing that we're live. Click on that, and you'll be able to continue to watch the show live on Facebook. And we're also on YouTube as well, live right now. If you are driving in your car, but you know you're about to get out of the car soon and you want to keep listening, don't have a radio nearby, you can also stream live through Facebook or YouTube. Our YouTube channel is the same name, Perenich, Caulfield, Avril and Noyes Injury Lawyers. You can leave your comments, questions right there in the chat box at the bottom. You'll get them answered live over the air. Perenich is spelled Perenich. So that's the way to look us up and find the show this evening. As I mentioned before, we do also have our podcast. So if you want to listen to the show later and you want to go back and hear it from top to bottom, the full hour, and you like podcasts and legal podcasts, then you should be following us on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. If you look up FLA Law on the radio, you'll find our podcast on there as well. You'll see past shows, and then soon tonight's show will be posted. Once it's completed, it'll be uploaded, and so you'll be able to go back and look at the podcast and check out some of our old episodes. We've had great guests on the show. Also, the attorneys at our firm, myself, Jacqueline Bryant, Lori Robinson, Matthew Noyes, Brian Caulfield, Mark Perenich. You'll be able to find some of those old episodes and old shows that give you great information from the legal perspective. And also you can hear some of the callers that called in the past and got their questions answered live on the air. So if that inspires you, just know that you are able to call in at 727-441-3000. And as I said, we're going to be talking about a couple cases. Tonight, we're going to be diving into a little bit of the Luigi Mangione trial. Don't believe it's been set yet, but everyone has heard by now of obviously the arrest of the individual, the young man that killed the CEO of United Healthcare. And he's now facing federal and state murder charges. And so that was obviously a very high profile matter. And a lot of people have had their thoughts and weighed in about Mangione. And surprisingly, he's had a lot of support in regards to the reason behind why he apparently or allegedly has done what he did. But again, it's all alleged. He hasn't been tried yet and innocent until proven guilty. The other trial we're going to be talking about is another high-profile case that is set for trial in May, actually, involving kind of disgraced rap mogul now, Diddy, P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, however you know him. He's actually getting ready to go to trial in May in regards to some pretty serious racketeering charges and sex trafficking, among many other things. And so obviously, we'll be dabbling a little bit on that, discussing what that trial might look like here in May when it comes up here in Manhattan is where that trial is actually going to be taking place. And then lastly, I believe this trial is going forward at the end of the year this year. A very sad case involving the killings of 4 University of Idaho students that happened last year, and they did arrest a suspect, and he is supposed to be standing trial for those 4 murders of the Idaho University college students. So we'll be talking about that. Obviously, a quadruple homicide of some innocent college students is quite difficult to try and put it before a jury. A lot of times, the jury selection process is the most difficult part because you do have such a huge media presence in terms of the coverage about the stories and surrounding what's happened. And so picking a jury and finding a jury who hasn't already been exposed to a good amount of the facts and information in the media is usually half the battle. And so those are some of the trials we're going to be talking about tonight when our guest arrives. And I think that should be an interesting show for you. But one thing that I want to point out, I said I'm always going to point out while we are celebrating this year, reminding all of our listeners, past, present clients, and hopefully future clients of those that are listening to FLA Law on the radio. As you know, this is hosted by the personal injury attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes, and I am, of course, proud to announce once again that we are still celebrating our 70th anniversary. And this is obviously quite a milestone for our firm. And this is something that many firms cannot say that they've been around this long. And it's just a testament to the strength of the law firm and the roots that we have here in the community as being one of the oldest injury law firms in the Tampa Bay area. The first to basically hold ourselves out as doing exclusively personal injury law and helping clients that have been injured, medical malpractice, and other negligent injuries. And so to be able to be in the business for this long, celebrating 70 years, is something that I certainly celebrate and give kudos to my colleagues and the staff at our firm. We have some of the best staff and case managers, legal assistants, paralegals as well, that don't always get the credit. We, a lot of times as the lawyers, we get a lot of the pat on the backs and the hugs from clients, but behind the scenes, our staff, are amazing. And that was one of the things that I learned very quickly when I first started with the firm, the importance of your paralegal and your support staff, and knowing that They are essentially the backbone of what you do, and you want to make sure that you show them appreciation, you support them, and give them the tools that they need, because we kind of work hand in hand together as a team with the paralegals. And I know most clients know that they talk to the paralegals just as much as the attorneys, and so that is also a great testament as to why the firm has been successful for so long, for 70 years. Not just the amazing attorneys that we have there, the board certified trial lawyers that we have there, but also the amazing staff that we have, and the ones that kind of lift us up and support us and keep us going, and make sure the clients are informed about their cases. They understand, what's going on in their matter. And so we are certainly very happy to have been in business for this long. And I recently celebrated my 13th year with the firm. And it's been quite a roller coaster ride. It's been exciting. I've learned a lot. And we practice exclusively personal injury, but we also do workers' comp and Social Security disability as well. And I remember sharing with Lori Robinson on one of the shows before that's something that I had never had any experience with before starting at the firm. And though it was new to me, it is quite rewarding to be able to get the people that have really been devastated by either injury or disability, some sort of medical condition that has caused them to not be able to work anymore, and then having to wait such a long process to go through the applications and the appeals and the hearings to finally at some point be approved for their disability. Those cases can be quite rewarding. And so again, it's been a wonderful journey, and hopefully you've been tuning in and hearing the great stories of our 70th anniversary here at the firm. So with that being said, we will have our guest coming in shortly. I wanted to remind all our listeners who he is. He's been on the show with us once before. I think he might have called in a time or two as well when he was on the campaign trail running for judge. But we have Cornelius Demps, who will be joining us this afternoon. He is the founding partner and managing attorney of his own law firm, the Demps Law Firm, based out of Wesley Chapel. And he is going to be joining us tonight, giving us some commentary on his firm and practice areas, and letting us know a little bit more about him. But also, he and I will be kind of diving in and discussing a little bit some of these cases. Of course, knowing that neither of us are completely well-versed on the facts and the information that's going on in these cases. I'm a personal injury attorney. He also handles personal injury. And so we don't have all the facts and information that go into these trials and that are going to kind of be the deciding factors in some of these cases. But of course, I think it's interesting to discuss what we can expect and the kinds of things that may come out of these cases, knowing that the trials are coming up and they're very high profile. Part of the reason that sparked me to want to talk about this topic is because recently I know there was like a little bit of social media outrage because an infamous person, an infamous defendant, had recently joined social media, and people were quite upset about it. And Casey Anthony, she of course had the high profile trial, I want to say about maybe 15 years ago, where she was acquitted, but she had been charged for the murder or involvement in the murder of her daughter, Kaylee Anthony, who I believe was 3 years old at the time. And the trial, although it happened locally in Central Florida, it was obviously national news, and everybody was talking about Casey Anthony, and the facts that were coming out about her trial were all very, very convincing in terms of guilt. I think a lot of people were very much thinking or believing that she would ultimately be found guilty or some count in regards to her daughter's death. I'm not entirely sure what all the counts she was charged with in terms of the murder. But ultimately, she was acquitted of all the charges, and she kind of has flown under the radar for a number of years. I don't think really we heard much about what she's been doing lately. And she kind of disappeared for a while. Nobody really knew where she was. And then she popped up on TikTok, and people were a bit of an outraged about the fact that she was calling herself a legal advocate and researcher. And she had created a TikTok to tell her story, I guess. And so everyone was quite upset about it. And even Nancy Grace came out of hiding and was very vocal about why Casey Anthony should not be on social media calling herself a legal advocate and researcher. And so with that being said, it got me to thinking about what high profile trials are kind of coming up right now. The ones that kind of they make history. People, they just don't forget about Casey Anthony. They don't forget about Trayvon Martin. They don't forget about O.J. Simpson. Those are kind of the trials that can just stick out in your mind. You don't forget about them. And they usually kind of bring up strong emotions in people. You either you hate them or you love them, or you think they're guilty or you don't. And so when that all sparked on social media with Casey Anthony, it got me thinking about some of these trials that I mentioned before. And so without further ado, I do want to jump into that, but I am going to take a quick commercial break. Our guest has arrived, and I'm sure you all would love to hear from him and talk a little bit about some of these trials that we just talked about with Luigi Mangione, Diddy, and of course, the University of Idaho murders. So we'll get back to that shortly after a quick break. The lines are open. If you have any questions or comments or just want to give your thoughts on these cases, feel free to call in at 727-441-3000. And we'll be back with our guest after this short break.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
After a car accident, there are many questions that you need answers to. Who pays for my car repairs? Who pays for the medical bills? What about my lost wages? And more. The personal injury law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes has been answering these questions for their clients for nearly 70 years. Since 1955, they've been a voice of the injured in the legal system. As one of the longest established law firms in Tampa Bay, Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes is here to answer your questions. Listen to their live call-in radio show on this channel every Tuesday evening from 5 to 6 p.m. or call them at 727-796-8282 or visit them at voiceoftheinjured.com. Offices Clearwater, non-attorney spokesperson.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Folks, we are back with FLA Law live on the radio. Thank you for joining me. I'm actually going to take a second to adjust our studio camera. I want to make sure you see our guest because he has arrived, Cornelius Demps. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Let the listeners know. Hopefully they remember you, but if not, let them know who you are and what you do, and we'll jump right into it.
Sure. So good evening. My name is Cornelius Demps. I'm the owner of the Demps Law Firm in Wesley Chapel, Florida. We practice in mainly in personal injury, criminal defense, and commercial litigation work. I began my career in the Sixth Circuit as a prosecutor in Newport Richey. So we call that the Sixth Circuit, handled every type of crime you could imagine. I did murders, rapes, drug trafficking cases, all the way down to lobster trapping violation cases, which may not be a big deal in Pinellas, but it's a very big deal on the coast of Pasco. Went on to be an attorney general in Tampa and a corporate litigator as well. Opened up my own firm in June of 2020. So this year will make 5 years.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. And as Jackie alluded to earlier, I did run for circuit judge last year here in Pasco and Pinellas County. Didn't win, but we got about 52,000 votes in the process, and
which is amazing.
Yeah, and just still committed to serving the community and really committed to driving down here to be on the radio with you all today.
Absolutely, we appreciate it. You came quite a ways. I mentioned earlier that his firm is actually in Wesley Chapel, which is obviously a part of our broadcast range, and so hopefully people are tuning in from Wesley Chapel and all over. But you actually have a pretty diverse background, which is why I wanted to kind of get your take on some of these trials, because you've been on both sides of the aisle here when it comes to representing those that have been charged, and then also representing the state.
All right.
And so some of these trials obviously have some federal components as well. I know you've handled some matters in federal court as well.
Yes.
And I'm going to be quite honest with you. A lot of questions that I ask on this show are usually, just so that our listeners have a better understanding. And sometimes I know the answers, sometimes I don't. But I'm going to be honest, a lot of these questions I may not even know the answers, because I have literally done personal injury my entire career. And I have not really looked at a criminal matter since the day I last studied for criminal on the bar exam. So a lot of it is really genuine questions that I have, and hopefully it'll be beneficial to our listeners as well as we kind of talk about these cases, because one of them is coming up very soon. But first I want to talk to kind of what was the bigger case that has really come up, and I'm sure most people have heard about it at this point, involving Luigi Mangione, right?
Right.
So, and the reason why I feel like it's become quite salacious, if you will, is not just because of what happened. Obviously, he's being accused of allegedly murdering a very high-profile CEO, right?
Right.
But aside from that, we have this component of like a Robin Hood factor, where people are almost kind of glamorizing him a little bit, in the sense that they can somewhat appreciate why his motive, why he may have done what he did. And then the fact that he also isn't a bad looking guy.
Right.
I think initially, before they even found him, they just had this photo of a guy in like a black hoodie and this really big Colgate smile. Right. And people were already like, well, I mean, he's got, the smile, right? Yeah. So it's like, you know what? I thought, well, how does that start to kind of factor in? So for those of you who may not know, maybe you just are super busy, haven't heard about it, I want to give you a little bit of the general facts. So Luigi Mangione, he's accused of murdering the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. He faces multiple charges, including murder, terrorism, stalking, and all of these carry the potential for the death penalty. I do believe that is what Pam Bondi has recommended.
Yes, as of today.
Right, for him. So the accusation right now is obviously that he was the one that kind of waited outside of a hotel where Mr. Brian Thompson was going for a meeting with the with the United Healthcare shareholders on December 4th of 2024, kind of laid in wait and then came out and shot him. My understanding that there's obviously federal and there's state. And then, of course, you and I can kind of talk a little bit more about why that is. But from what I understand, the federal charges right now are murder through the use of a firearm, 2 stalking charges, and then a firearm offense. Right. And then there's also the state component, which I'm not sure how those trials run, if they're concurrent or if there's something, parallel. But the state charges are first-degree murder and furtherance of terrorism, 2 counts of second-degree murder, and then there's multiple weapons offenses. My understanding is that he's pled not guilty to everything, all charges. And then looks like they have a couple of things that they're looking at for his motive. I mentioned the fact that he's kind of taken on this Robin Hood persona a little bit. And the reason being, I think they found a journal or some writings of some kind on him at the time that they found him. And those writings seem to express his grievances towards CEOs and those that are in the modern American healthcare system. his grievances towards that. He's raised quite a bit of money, apparently, towards his legal defense. And so, of course, I think that's going to play into the defense strategy and potentially finding a jury, and how the jury might be very difficult to find in this case, because you have the factor of jury nullification that we can chat about as well.
Sure.
So tell me your thoughts on Luigi Mangione.
This case is just kind of a wild case, and I think it's a mixture of, you have a lot of things that are kind of they're meeting at the same point of this trial. So you have this backlash that people have against the insurance industry that we have right now.
Oh yeah.
You have corporate America, which has always been under attack from the general public, but also it's a fear of people who work in corporate America as well, especially CEOs of other companies now are worried about their own safety and their own security. And you have, as always, the power of social media, and how social media has really changed and influenced everything with this case. So with this case, there's a state component and the federal component. So there's
tell me about that, because I'm a bit ignorant when it comes to that.
Yeah, sure. So if you're charged with a state crime, you commit the crime in the state. If you commit a federal crime, either you committed a federal offense, or in this case, which we have with the Mangione case, he's charged also with cyber stalking as well as the traveling, because I believe he was in Atlanta and he traveled to New York. So you're crossing over state lines. That's going to trigger a federal component.
Gotcha.
There's federal firearm offenses that he's also going to be looking at as well, namely the ghost gun that was found on him. That's going to be prosecuted. And because he used a firearm during the commission of a murder that also gives the federal prosecutors grounds to proceed on those offenses. Usually murder is not a charge you see a lot in federal court, but in some situations it can happen. A lot of times the murder cases are handled at the state level, but this one, there's obviously some clear ramifications.
Yeah.
There's also another component of this trial, of the federal trial as well, because during his campaign, President Donald Trump made it very clear that he wanted to bring back a capital punishment and reinforce it, especially when the Biden administration had decided not to do a lot of those cases, and the Trump administration said they were going to be ramping up those prosecution of those trials. The Biden administration was the one who originally filed the charges in this case.
Mm-hmm.
The Trump administration, as of today, under General Bondi, has announced they are going to be seeking the death penalty. So to understand the federal cases, that's pretty straightforward. The two state cases is where things get very, very interesting. So
it's Pennsylvania, right?
Right, New York and Pennsylvania.
And New York
and Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
So we all know what the general facts are of the case. The background of Mangione, from what we understand so far, is he comes from a very wealthy family out of Baltimore. Definitely a good-looking kid, a rich kid, but he suffered some type of debilitating back injury long ago, one that really limited his way of life. Obviously not too much, because he ended up moving to Honolulu, Hawaii at one point and was working as like a part-time surfer or something. And even the people who knew him in Hawaii, when they were speaking with investigators, they said that for the most part, he was a pretty normal guy until he had back issues, and they really started to mess with his life. And in this case, in most murder trials, or most criminal cases, just to make it easy for everybody to understand, there's three major components that prosecutors are looking for, and that's called means, motive, and opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Means, the ability to do the crime; motive, the reason why you want to do the crime; and opportunity, which is the chance to do the crime in the situation. So with here, So with this case, what we understand is that Mangione had clearly no love for the health insurance industry.
Right.
In general, he was not an insured, meaning a customer of United Healthcare, where Brian Thompson was the CEO of this company at the time the shooting happened. So, and United had released a statement saying that he's not one of our insureds in this matter. But United Healthcare is one of the largest insurance companies in the U.S.
Sure.
Brian Thompson is the CEO in this role. And for whatever reason, he decided that I'm going to, or allegedly, I should say,
to send a message.
Right. Prosecutors allege that he's going to send a message by killing off Brian Thompson. One thing that's very scary to me was that Mangione was able to get access to the travel itinerary for Mr. Thompson, because I know he was speaking at this conference in Manhattan, and also as a CEO, especially in New York, you expect the CEO to have more security around him than what he had. But Mangione essentially travels from Atlanta to New York.
I assume that's where the cyber stalking charges are probably coming in at. With the fact that he somehow found that information.
Right. Using the information and using certain faculties in order to be able to facilitate that stalking, namely a laptop computer and a cell phone, to be able to figure out where he is. And those are two things that we all use every single day. But he essentially travels to New York across state lines. So that's where the federal action happens. He checks into a Manhattan hotel using a fake ID. And that's really important for what happens down into the Pennsylvania cases. So he stays the night. Next day, sees Brian Thompson at the hotel, allegedly shoots him using the ghost gun, and is able to escape. He then leaves from New York and then travels across state lines into Pennsylvania, namely into Pittsburgh, and later on to Altoona, where he goes to a McDonald's. He's covering his face. He's wearing a medical mask to hide who he is.
Right.
And then law enforcement is trying to look for who the suspect is. Like you say, his picture pops up. Half the people are like, this guy's got to be prosecuted. The other half is like, is he on Hinge or Tinder? Because I want to find this guy and date him as soon as possible.
Right.
And in this case, you have to thank God for hardworking employees of McDonald's, right? Because an employee of McDonald's looks up, sees this guy sitting in the corner.
Which I don't even see how she was able to identify him.
Hey,
That's pretty.
If he was on social media and she was looking at his picture over and over again, I mean, pretty easy for her to figure him out, right?
Yeah.
And then she sees him, gets worried, contacts law enforcement. Law enforcement approaches Mangione, and do we have the federal charges, the New York charges, which is the state murder that happens,
right?
But there's also Pennsylvania charges,
right?
And the Pennsylvania charges.
Explain that to me.
Yeah. So Pennsylvania also charged Mangione with possession of the fake IDs, possessions of firearms without having a proper licensors, I think, and other state offenses that are in the state of Pennsylvania.
Got it.
So the Pennsylvania case is going to control a lot of aspects of the federal case and the state case. Here is why. If law enforcement approaches you and they start asking you questions and they're getting ready to elicit incriminating responses from you, law enforcement, and you are in custody, law enforcement has to give you what's called your Miranda rights. And if you watch Law and Order, any types of TV shows, you know it is, your right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, the whole nine. So in the Pennsylvania case, there's an attorney named Thomas Dickey. Thomas Dickey was retained to represent Mangione in the Pennsylvania cases. Now, Thomas Dickey has not disclosed who hired him. There is a strong belief that he was retained from money that was raised on different GoFundMe accounts that were used to retain to represent him in the case. And Thomas Dickey filed a motion to suppress, meaning he's telling the court, my client's constitutional rights were violated in Pennsylvania.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and if they were violated in Pennsylvania, then that means everything that law enforcement got has to be suppressed and thrown out.
Wow.
And I read the motion before I came here today. But what Dickey is saying is when Mangione was at the McDonald's and law enforcement approached him, they began asking him questions. What is your travel plans? Where have you been? And when they are speaking to him, they ask, hey, can we see your ID? And so Mangione pulls out the fake New Jersey ID, the same one he used to check into Manhattan. And they check and they go, oh, this isn't a real ID. And then Mangione, according to law enforcement, starts to shake, starts to equivocate, gets worried. What Thomas Dickey is arguing in the Pennsylvania case is, my client at some point during that interview is worried. Law enforcement says, hey, we're going to give you your Miranda rights right now. They give him his Miranda rights. They ask him, do you want to speak to us? And according to Dickey, Mangione says, no, I do not want to talk to you. So that's called invoking your Miranda rights. If you invoke your Miranda rights, the law says that law enforcement has to stop their investigation.
Conversation stops.
Conversation stops. They have to go ahead and make an arrest and do what they have to do, but they can't elicit any other statements. What Thomas Dickey is arguing is that when Mangione invoked his Fifth Amendment rights to remain silent, the officer told him, oh, you're not in custody. You can talk to us. And Mangione said, oh, okay, and began talking to him. And during that conversations, they were able to find the backpack that had the ghost gun. They were able to compare it. They got the water bottle and the protein bar that had the fingerprints that tied him to the scene. They were able to get also access to the other documents, including, I think, the ledger where he'd written out his disdain of the insurance industry. So everything in the Pennsylvania motion to suppress is going to control the New York case and the federal case. Even the attorneys retained on the federal case in New York, I forgot her last name, but she had made that very clear to the federal judges and to the prosecutors that the Pennsylvania case is going to be the lead case that's going to control everything.
So then do the councils each have to file similar same motions to suppress, or is there any way for them to say, well, this is controlling because this is what happened? There's already been a ruling, therefore it's across the board. Or does the federal defense attorney and the New York State defense attorney all have to file their own motions to suppress.
So the better strategy for the defense attorneys here in this case would be for them all to sit down and just to talk to one another. And I think that what the New York attorneys and the Pennsylvania attorneys, I think based on the case, they are working together, because what you have is, one, the federal charges have not really, he has not been arraigned yet on his federal charges, meaning not formally brought before the judge. My understanding is the federal arraignment doesn't happen until April 18th anyway. But the better strategy is for the New York attorneys to work with the Pennsylvania attorneys to make sure they suppress as much evidence as possible.
Yeah,
because if they can get the stop right then and there, there's no need to file any other motions. They can just get a ruling from a Pennsylvania judge. And could you imagine in this case where you're looking at, society wanting to protect the hardworking men and women? For the most part, Brian Thompson didn't do anything wrong. He didn't. All he did was work hard his entire life, become a CEO.
He was a CEO.
Go to a conference, raise his kids, spend time with his wife. The only thing he did was literally walk out and get shot. And that's terrifying. That has a chilling effect on people working in the corporate area. So you have that. You have a lot of evidence that could really help in prosecuting this case. And then on the other side, you issue of jury nullification.
Exactly.
The prosecutors are looking down the barrel at that jury nullification, because all you need is a very good, skilled defense attorney to go to court in front of a jury and make this argument as much as possible that he may have done something wrong, but really, as every defense attorney is trained to do, you have to put somebody else on trial, not just your client. And in this case, you put the entire healthcare industry on trial, and you do that case anywhere, most juries may side with that, which is crazy. But it's insane to think that all of that could go away if one judge in Pennsylvania.
That's what I was about to say.
Right.
So when it really comes to defense strategy, that's really where you start, is that motion to suppress, because that's a game changer for what happens after that.
Right.
Yeah.
That controls everything. So if a circuit judge ultimately rules there is a Fifth Amendment violation here, Miranda rights were told, but his right to Miranda was violated because they continued to elicit questions from him. That means all the evidence that was seized in Pennsylvania that was then used to do investigations in New York, that all goes out the window too. So prosecutors have to find some other way to try the case. And if they can't, they have no choice but to dismiss the charges or force the case to go to trial, and you're looking at a serious judgment of acquittal.
Yeah. And as a prosecutor, if you get that big loss that's handed to you and that evidence is suppressed, it's like, well, how would you see? Obviously, we don't have all the facts, but how do you see that case going forward? And the fact, if they do prevail in that suppression,
it can't. I mean, it can't go forward. There's no other way to get it tied in. I mean, you'd have to. And as skilled prosecutors, you're trained to be able to look at both sides of the V, as we say, figure out the strengths and the weaknesses of your case, and learn how to get around it. But that's going to be a really high mountain for them to climb over to be able to secure a conviction.
Yeah. So I appreciate you looking at that motion, because I wasn't. I knew that they were alleging some constitutional right violations, but I hadn't really gotten into it. So that's interesting. Yeah. That'll be interesting to see how that ends up playing out. Now, aside from that, let's assume that fails and the evidence does not get suppressed and the trials are going forward. Given the things that were found on him and the fingerprints you mentioned and the writings and so forth, what kind of strategy do you have going into that as a defense lawyer?
I mean, it's tough to do, right? Because as a defense attorney, you're trained to, you have to just show reasonable doubt and make sure you can convince a jury that, your client is innocent until proven guilty, and proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So you have to find any shreds of doubt in the evidence, in the chain of custody, and statements that have been made. It's going to be hard, but it's not impossible. Yeah. And if you can't get that done, then defense attorneys in this case, they know the power of jury nullification that they would have in this case. So it'll be a tough one.
Talk about that, because our listeners may not know exactly what jury nullification means.
Right. So yes.
So let's explain that a little bit about what exactly is jury nullification.
Sure. So jury nullification is, in most states, it's also a jury instruction that says, essentially, to make a long story short, someone committed a crime. If you find that all the elements of the crime exist, but a conviction is not warranted, you as a jury can decide that we are not going to convict this person of this offense.
Right.
When I was a prosecutor, we faced a lot of issues of jury nullification in possession of marijuana cases. Yeah. Right. Especially in like rural areas.
I could see that.
Yeah. Because juries, they know it's a crime, but some people go, it's a crime, but it's not as bad as this or that. So we're just going to find them not guilty and let them walk. And, jury nullification also happened in Emmett Till case, where there was more than enough evidence to show that these men had killed Emmett Till, including confessions by the men. Sure. But the juries in the end said, yeah, we get it, but jury nullification, we're just going to go ahead and let these guys go.
Right. So then in this case, what we're seeing is a lot of support for Mangione and, arguments that, maybe what he did wasn't wrong or he had a basis for it or they're feeling that they sympathize with, what he was going through. If that kind of creeps into the case and the jury room, how much of a factor do you think that really is? That a real risk that the prosecutors are facing in this case?
I think it is a real risk, which is why if the case does go to trial, jury selection is going to be paramount.
Yeah,
it is going to be paramount because the case will be tried in New York. It'll likely be tried in Manhattan. Manhattan, you're dealing with people who tend to lean left politically. They tend to be more educated on cases, or more educated generally on the law. You're in New York City. It's going to be a tough one. They're able to fight over jury nullification. So as prosecutors, you could try to do what's called pretty much like a district-wide venire, trying to get as many people as possible to come in. But, I think that's still going to be pretty tough to deal because you're still going to be in New York City, right? So it'll be hard. If you have a younger jury, if I'm a prosecutor, I want as many young jurors as possible off of that jury.
I was going to say, those are the ones you don't want.
No,
anybody with a TikTok account.
Yeah, exactly. I'll just be like, does anyone have TikTok? And anybody raise their hands will be like, "Call, just get rid of them."
We're getting those stricken right now.
Yeah, that jury selection process is going to be tough because, you ask people basic questions like, who here has ever had, problem with medical insurance? Who here has ever had a debilitating pain and denied a claim? So that's why certain motions, like motions in limine, will play a big role. So motions in limine are motions you file before trial that we get a pretrial ruling from a judge excluding certain statements and evidence at trial.
Right.
And I think those motions in limine are going to be very big if you're the prosecutor because you want to argue that, hey, the insurance industry is not on trial. Mangione's on trial.
Keeping certain phrases, certain words, certain things out of the purview of the jury for sure.
Right.
That is, to me, is going to be a very pretrial motion intensive type of a case.
Absolutely.
Because what you get in is really going to determine how that trial goes. So that should be interesting. So we don't have a trial date yet. So obviously we can always have you come back later as we know more and get closer to trial. But so here's another big one. As we mentioned earlier in the show, Diddy, Puff Daddy,
Sean
Combs. However, he's got a million names. I think he even goes by Love.
Yeah. When in the indictment, they say he goes by Sean Diddy or Sean Combs, aka Puff Daddy, aka P Diddy, aka Diddy, aka PD, aka Love.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think the last name was Love. So So however you characterize him, I feel like most people at this point also know about or have heard about the facts of the trial, right, wrong. Some of the facts that people are saying aren't even anywhere in the indictment or have any factor, but people have come up with all kinds of details and salacious facts that have really blown this up to the point that I think I told you off the air that even my 9-year-old, their classmates talk about it. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is really going to be a challenge for him. So for those of you, I'm not going to go too much into detail because a lot of it is very
graphic.
Graphic is the best word to put it. But, long story short, he is facing charges for sex trafficking, racketeering, and I believe there's several other components regarding force and just psychological and physical harm towards employees and people that he's worked with, transporting women for the purposes of prostitution and or sex trafficking. And so there's the federal charge. I'm not aware if there's a state component, but what I do know is that the trial is set for May 5th, and he had 3 attorneys. One of them has withdrawn. He still has 2, and it's going forward in Manhattan. This is a huge trial, right? What are your thoughts on it?
This trial is insane. And for people who don't know, the defense attorney in the Mangione case in the federal court is married to the defense attorney for Diddy in his separate trial. So I mean, just the conversations.
This household.
I know, just wow.
My brain would be exploding at this point.
Yeah. So for background for the P Diddy case, for people who don't know, really how this all started, you have to go back to around 2016 when the video on TMZ was released of Sean Combs,
With
P.
Cassie.
Diddy, with Cassie Ventura, who's an RB artist herself, who goes by the name Cassie, of him violently attacking her on a video. It's very disturbing to watch. And then when that video gets out, P. Diddy does something that no defense attorney ever wants their client to do, which is he admits to it and gives a statement,
He
a public
gives this video, right?
Yeah, a video release of him apologizing for what happened and doing all of that. And it appears that that is the catalyst for what leads to, in part, to what happens with the racketeering case happening. Because then after this comes out, then Sean P. Diddy, we'll use names interchangeably here.
Yeah,
but,
you know what we're talking about.
You know what we're talking about. But P. Diddy essentially gets sued by various other people who are all alleging that Sean Combs has a proclivity of violence, and then sexual violence starts coming from that. This leads to then federal prosecutors investigating and deciding to charge him with a RICO violation. So what is a RICO? So RICO,
please break that down.
Sure.
Help us understand why this is RICO. Yes. Even a lot of, I think, high profile or celebrities don't even understand why he's being charged the way he's being charged.
Right. So RICO is a kind of a, I want to say now it's not new, but it's a development that is created by the law in order to go after criminal enterprises. So a long time ago, let's say you're in a group like a gang or the mafia or the Klan or any type of organizations, and you're trying to shut them down. Well, it was hard to do it because you would only prosecute individual people for doing individual things like a murder or a robbery or stealing or trying to bribe or something like that. Then the RICO laws got passed, which now says that you can prosecute the entire organization as a whole as long as you show there's some type of criminal elements that are going on. There's some activity that's going, and the purpose of this is to continue their criminal objectives. So these are called criminal enterprises. Right. And a RICO, RICO, stands for Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations. Right. And so what the federal prosecutors are alleging is that P. Diddy runs a criminal enterprise, and in the indictment, they list a variety of companies that he owns that are a part of this overall enterprise. I want to make sure I get this right because I had to print this out myself the other day. But yes, in the indictment, they're alleging that P. Diddy owns various American-owned businesses headquartered in Manhattan, New York, and Los Angeles, California, which go by the names Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs Enterprises, and Combs Global. And those companies do a variety of work, of course, record labeling work, recording in studios, an apparel line, right? Alcohol and spirits. He famously had that connection with Ciroc Liquors before. Right. A marketing agency, and of course, his TV and media network companies. And that is all referred to as the enterprise. And that essentially he leverages his celebrity and the power and influence of these organizations in order to convince people to do some things that they don't want to do.
A lot of coercion.
A lot of coercion, specifically targeting women, and in some cases men and women who are up and coming in the music industry, who have talent. The talent has ranged from anywhere from people who have performed on stage, they've gone on tour, all the way down to, as one of the LA lawsuits is alleging, is a man who's literally just a street performer, and that he was brought in and had things that were forced on him. And what the prosecutors are alleging is that from a period of 2009 to the present, P. Diddy used the enterprise of his company to force in high number women to do a lot of sexual acts against their will that they didn't want to do. Right. And so one thing that is,
a lot of people have heard about quantities of baby oil, and it's like everybody's making this a baby oil thing. It's like, what are the actual charges here?
I mean, baby oil is
baby oil and guns.
So it's guns, it's racketeering, and then the racketeering influence is using sexual violence against several women who are victims of the enterprise. Essentially, they would lure women into these large, lavish parties in Manhattan, in Los Angeles, and in Miami, and they were referred to legally in the indictment as freak-offs, which essentially are these lavish parties where it's alleged that P. Diddy would fly in commercial sex workers who were men and would bring them to these parties, and then these women would come to the parties and they would be forced to engage with these men in certain acts against their will. Either the women were drugged, either through controlled substances or something was placed in their drink, or if they were sober, they were forced through violence and coercion for them to engage in these acts with these men. So
is the flying in component the trafficking? Is that where
it's one aspect of it? Yeah. It's one aspect of it, definitely. And not just the flying in of the women, but also the flying in of the commercial sex workers, men as well coming. Because the men in this case also are considered victims as well into the enterprise. And they'd be brought to these parties, engage in these acts. They would be forced to take narcotics to be able to keep performing. In some situations, they were given IV fluids to stay awake. And some of these parties would last as long as from like a couple hours to weeks on end. And there was large sums of cash given to the male workers, and some cash, and then and also given to the females who were able to participate, who were forced to participate in some of these activities. And what happened is a lot of these females and men were like, "Hey, I'm not going to be silent on this. I want to come forward and say something." And so what the federal prosecutors are alleging is that using the power and influence of the Combs enterprise, they then his employees, staff members, some higher-ranking supervisors then committed additional acts of coercion and violence against these women and men to keep them silent.
So it was all interwoven into the corporations and the companies and the enterprise itself. That was like the culture of the business.
That was culture of the business. And it was used to lure a lot of these men and women also into, because, it's Diddy. So, they wanted to be a part of this life. They wanted to be able to be a part of this. And so they used this in several ways to really hurt some people in this process.
Yeah. Defense strategy. Where do you see this going? Well, I don't think we're going to get to Idaho. So let's talk about it. Yeah. Where do you see the defense strategy going on this Diddy trial? That's just a month away.
Yeah, it's going to be tough because you're talking about the problem with a RICO, defending a RICO. The only argument you can really make in RICOs is that I didn't organize any of this. Everybody kind of acted on their own. And if they wanted to work with me, that was cool. So I didn't have nothing to do with that. When it comes to any of the sexual interactions, it's consent, right? That's going to be the top defense they're going to have to raise. Yeah. That's really going to be hard to do, especially because not only do you have the criminal components, but you also have the civil lawsuits that are going on as well. Yeah. And then like the Mangiano case, you also have to really try your best to control the dialogue because social media has blown up in this case.
Absolutely. That goes back to the whole jury issue. Yeah. The jury pool, it's going to be hard
extremely
to find
difficult.
A jury.
It is. Yeah. And he doesn't know Diddy. I mean, Diddy's international. Like that's going to be hard to really find.
Very much global.
Yeah. And then the U.S. attorney on the case, he also mentioned that there are other people that we believe are involved in the enterprises who are going to be charged. And then since that trial since the case has begun, we've seen additional civil lawsuits. The one pop up involving Jay-Z. Right. The one that now alleges that Drewski and which is a social media influencer, and Odell Beckham Jr. are also implicated in this as well. And not to mention, because of the range of when these, quote unquote, freak offs have happened from 2009 till now, there is an ocean of celebrities.
Such a wide,
who could be involved. So it's going to be a tough one.
Whew, I can't imagine the fallout. I mean, as far as issues like we mentioned with the Mangione trial, motions to suppress, have you seen anything successful that has come out of the Diddy side, or have they not really been able to suppress things?
I haven't seen anything so far that's been filed here in the case.
I know he hasn't been able to successfully get a bond at all.
No, he would be I could see the judge. I understand the judge's ruling. He's a prime flight risk. I mean, the guy's facing a long time.
And especially if he's already being, part of the allegations is the force and the coercion, then what's to say that he won't do that, while he's out on bond? So
correct.
And witness tampering and all of those things are an issue. So I can understand why that happened. Right. Thank you so much for joining us. I wish we had more time. We still haven't even gotten into the last trial. We could talk about the first two, for even a little bit longer. But with that being said, that just means we'll have to have you come back.
Yeah, sure.
Give our listeners a little bit of info on how to find you. Hopefully no one's out there facing the kind of charges that we've been talking about. But of course, family members, friends, anyone that they have these kinds of criminal issues or matters or things that come up that you handle, how can they find you?
They can find us on the internet at www.dempslaw.com, DEMPSLAW.
Awesome. So that is the best way to reach Cornelius Demps for your criminal defense type matters. Look him up online, see what kinds of cases that he takes. We'll certainly have to have him come back and talk more about some of these trials, especially as we get closer to the trial dates or as the trials are in full swing. That'd be great to have him back again. But with that being said, you've been listening to FLA Law live on the radio. We'll put this up on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and on iTunes so that you can check out the podcast later. Thanks, Cornelius, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next Tuesday at 5 o'clock, folks. Good night.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.